when it comes to things, so like voodoo, or when it comes to things like penis theft, and you gave a few more examples, cross-cultural examples in your book. I think the sort of typical, maybe a little chauvinistic Western response is to be like, oh, well, they're just uneducated, they're just, superstitious. What we need to do is teach them some science, and then we can nip that in the bud. So what's your sort of response to something like that?
Well, that's an old that gets into just sort of how complicated the word culture is and what we mean when we say it, and that particular understanding, I heard that a lot actually, even abroad when I was in China and Hong Kong and stuff. Once people are educated, this won't happen anymore. And so one way that goes is to ask, well, what is education? Is it teaching a different way of thinking? Is it just teaching our way of thinking? Is it teaching people to question new ways of thinking, or what is it exactly? But that specific kind of narrative is an old kind of colonial narrative, which comes out of an idea of culture that came from E.B. Tyler, who I talked a little bit about in my book, who came up with this idea that that culture. It was not just him. There was a lot of people talking about this and thinking about it at the time. But his paradigm kind of became the dominant one for whatever reason. Where, like in the past, people were savages, and then they just lived according to their impulses, and then started to develop a little bit of morals and things like that, and they became barbarians. And then eventually they developed rationality and things like that, and started using utensils, and then they became civilized, which is like Britain basically. So that idea that there was this kind of straight line evolution, and we are up here and we have to help people down here get up to where we are, is kind of that same thing. And it sounds silly when you say it like that almost nowadays, because we have a more nuanced understanding of it and how cultures evolve and what they are and what they do. And one of the things I wanted to do in my book was to kind of hold a mirror up to that, and just because when you first hear about penis stealing, that's exactly what you think. Then when you start to look at our own cultural syndromes, like premenstrual syndrome or carpal tunnel syndrome, or even something like depression that varies widely over cultures, and it has a cultural component, then it becomes less easy to kind of look down our noses at other people and their beliefs, and how their beliefs sort of feed into their own illnesses and health.
Yeah. So as I was reading your book, one of the studies that sort of left to mind was the sort of suicide epidemics that happened. So there's actually this really interesting research showing how suicide in the West is kind of contagious. Sort of the same with mass shootings. Like we've completely sort of revamped the way we discuss mass shootings, because
David Phillips who does that?
I don't remember off the top of my head. That sounds right, but I could be making that up. But like, for example, like when Marilyn Monroe killed herself, they like sort of tracked suicides afterwards of like people jumping out the windows, specifically people who look like Marilyn Monroe. And they tracked that like there was a 12% in sort of similar suicides. Something like 300 people who were dead. I think it was the month of October. So if you compare that October to like the October after and the October before it, there's something like 300 people. It seems like her suicide inspired to kill herself. So it does seem like these sorts of things are, having decent science education doesn't seem to completely get rid of these sorts of things in the West. Can you give a few more examples of where you see these sort of you discussed some of the cross-cultural research on like depression, but
actually, just to build on that, David Phillips, this guy who's done a lot of this sort of research, had I think a paper out where he looked at car accidents, single-person car accidents after celebrity death, and there's a slight uptick in those. And his theory was that these are suicides, actually, not just accidents. And so, but he also did a lot of other super interesting research about how belief in Chinese medicine affects your mortality if you have a certain kind of condition that you believe you're susceptible to because of your birth year and stuff like this. But going back to the contagion idea, that was one of the most fascinating things. I mean, like carpal tunnel syndrome is a good one. It seems like something that's just mechanical. It's purely because of how you're holding your wrist, and it's just your nerve like rubbing against your wrist. But actually, those things like carpal tunnel syndrome have come and gone in time, and actually right now, and you can see how they become part of this narrative ecosystem where everybody's talking about it, everybody's worried about it, and then the incidents start to go up and up and up, and then at some point people stop worrying about it, and then it goes down. Right now, it's on its way out. It's not really diagnosed very much at all, or people don't really have it now. Another one that's really interesting is sort of lower back pain, which is nobody fully understands all the risk factors, what causes it, and things like that. But these researchers in Germany, after Germany was unified in 1991, I think, they did an all-German health study, and in East Germany they had a lower rate of back pain than West Germany by 16 points or something, pretty significant. And over the next 5 or 6 years, it started going up until it kind of met the West German rates, and then since then they've tracked together. And so the researchers who wrote the paper were suggesting that sort of West German narratives about back pain were sort of permeating into East Germany and causing the rates of back pain to go up there. And so that's an example of a contagious thing. But these other guys who wrote this book, Christalis and Fowler, I can't remember how to pronounce the name, but they've done a lot. Their book was called Contagion, I think, or Contagious, or something like that. And they looked at the Framingham heart data and tracked how different things flow through the networks, and something like obesity can be contagious, but the way it flows is through socially, not geographically. And so if somebody named someone as a friend and that person became obese, then your chance of becoming obese grew. Whereas if they didn't, there was no relationship or no flow of it. And so I think to a bigger extent than we appreciate, a lot of these things kind of flow through society in a way that we haven't really fully appreciated till now. I mean, penis theft, from penis theft, which goes really fast, lower back pain, to obesity, to gluten intolerance would be another one that I'm sure you could show flow really strongly socially. And so and it works almost exactly like it would work on Hainan Island with penis theft. Somebody you know tells you about this thing that happened to somebody they knew, and they explain it, and then you understand what the cause is, and so it kind of affects your causal perception. And that's kind of the thing at the root of all this is your causal perception. What do you think are the forces, kind of the basic forces at work? And in our culture we think it's chemistry or physical processes. In Nigeria they think it's magic. In another culture they would think it's something else. I can't think of an example, but so that's kind of it's the same process in a way.